Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. The U.S. Federal Reserve has decided to keep its key interest rate steady, citing uncertainties from the Iran war and rising concerns about inflation. But the decision was the most divided in decades, with 8 officials voting to hold rates and 4 dissenting. U.S. President Donald Trump has said his administration is reviewing a possible reduction of American troops stationed in Germany, following his criticism of the German chancellor over the war in Iran on Tuesday. South Korea's industrial output, retail sales, and facility investments all rose from a month earlier in March, marking the first time in 6 months that all 3 indicators posted growth compared to the previous month. We begin this morning in the United States. The Federal Reserve has held rates steady for a 3rd straight meeting amid war-driven inflation fears and economic uncertainty. Chair Jerome Powell raised concerns over the Fed's independence as nominee Kevin Walsh moves closer to confirmation. Our Kim Junho starts us off.
The U.S. Federal Reserve left interest rates unchanged at 3.5 to 3.75% on Wednesday, in what is likely to be Jerome Powell's final meeting as Fed chair. The decision was announced after a divided FOMC regular meeting and marks the 3rd consecutive rate freeze this year. Explaining the move, the central bank pointed to mounting inflation pressure from rising global oil prices tied to the Middle East conflict, as well as growing economic uncertainty.
The U.S. economy has been expanding at a solid pace. While job gains have remained low, the unemployment rate has been little changed in recent months. Inflation has moved up and is elevated, in part reflecting the recent increase in global energy prices.
The decision was the most divided since 1992, with 4 dissenting, including 3 who took issue with language in the post-meeting statement that suggested the central bank could eventually resume rate cuts. The Fed said it remains committed to achieving its 2% inflation goal over time, adding it is prepared to adjust policy if risks threaten that path, a signal some analysts say leaves the door open to rate cuts. The meeting was also likely the final FOMC session under Jerome Powell. However, at a press conference on the same day, he said he plans to stay at the central bank as a member of its board of governors.
After my term as chair ends on May 15, I will continue to serve as a governor for a period of time to be determined. I plan to keep a low profile as a governor.
The June FOMC meeting is expected to be chaired by nominee Kevin Walsh. The Senate Banking Committee on Wednesday advanced Walsh's nomination to the full Senate, and if confirmed, he is expected to assume the role after Powell's term as chair ends. Kim Junho, Arirang News.
And now for more on the Fed's latest decision to hold rates, we're joined today by Professor Shin Se-don, professor at the Division of Business Economics at Sookmyung Women's University. Professor Shin, thanks for coming on today.
My pleasure.
So the U.S. Federal Reserve has decided to hold its key interest rate steady, citing inflation and uncertainties from the Iran war. But the board vote was the most divided since 1992. What are your thoughts on the Fed's latest decision?
Well, even, the decision to hold the rate was 8 for and 4 against. It is 100% anticipated in the market by yesterday. So everybody was expecting the Fed will be holding the rate this time. Most important, information through yesterday's announcement is that the rate will be kept at the current level of 3.75% up to the end of 2026. Many people in the market had expected that there will be at least a couple of rate cuts in year 2026. But today's meeting, manifested that there will be no cut because inflation at the moment, in the month of March, it was 3.26%, way above target, which is 2.0%. And unemployment rate of 4.3% is lowest ever in U.S. economic history in recent times. So labor market is very strong. and inflation is very high, and we have to expect further inflation because of the Iran war. So there's no room for the Fed to lower the key rate through 2026. Even Kevin Walsh is nominated. I mean, it has become the chairman in this year. So I'm expecting that there will be no more cuts this year.
I see. And how might the Fed's decision affect the Bank of Korea's rate decision next month?
Well, United States key rate is 3.75%, and Korea counterpart is 2.5%. So there is already 125 basis point gap between the U.S. rate and Korea. So Korea rate is very low, and it has been so more than a couple of years. So if the U.S. is keeping the rate at the current level, there's no room for the Bank of Korea to further lower the Korean key rate. So I'm also expecting that Korean, the key rate should be either stayed at the current level, or there's a possibility that Korean rate will go up at least 25 basis points, because first, Korean currency has been very weak, last 12 months. So if the Bank of Korea lower the rate, the exchange rate will be further unstable. And another one is that housing market has become very unstable, at least in several months. So considering the situation in exchange rate and housing market, I think there's no room for the Bank of Korea to lower the rate. Or opposite, is that probably the Bank of Korea may have to raise in the second half of 2026.
I see. We'll have to see how that goes next month. And Korea's stock market climbed this week to become the world's 8th largest, surpassing the United Kingdom, which is Europe's biggest market. How significant is this, and what does this mean for South Korea?
It is a great feat of achievement, not just of the Korean stock markets, but also of Korean firms and Korean economy. Now, global economy is beginning to realize the potential, industrial and financial potential of Korea, which has been neglected, for a long time. So the stock market in Korea is going to be the issue, not in terms of Korean market, but in Asian market. And what does that will bring to Korean economy? I think it's going to have a huge wealth effect on consumption as well as on investment. So I think economic growth of Korea will be boosted because of the surge in Korean stock prices.
And Korea's stock market growth has been, largely driven by Samsung Electronics, which is the country's largest company by market cap. But the company is right now facing protests from unionized workers over the huge pay gap compared to workers at its rival SK Hynix. And there are concerns that the strike action could possibly disrupt global supply chains. What are your thoughts on this?
Understanding, Samsung and Hynix are the biggest supply of semiconductor chips to the global market. Global supply chain could be hampered if the friction between the union and the management continues for weeks, if not months. So it's going to have a tremendous effect upon global economy if the friction continues, the month of May and probably month of June. So I hope that the friction should be ended as soon as possible for the benefit of Korean economy and also for the benefit of the union members. So I think the government has to practice very important pivotal role in mediating the union and the management, and I'm expecting the government will participate in mediating the dispute between the two parties.
All right, Professor Shin, thank you so much for your time and insight today. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And Korea posted a triple gain in March with industrial output, retail sales, and facility investment all rising on month for the first time in 6 months. Data released Thursday by the Ministry of Data and Statistics showed industry production edged up 0.3% last month, marking the second consecutive month of increase. Industrial and manufacturing output both rose 0.3%, but semiconductors, which have been a key driver, saw a fall of around 8%. Refined petroleum products also dropped by about 6%, partly due to the impact of the Middle East conflict. Domestic demand showed signs of recovery, with services, retail sales, and facility investment all posting gains in the 1% range. As Washington ramps up pressure on Tehran to strike a deal, U.S. President Donald Trump has signaled a prolonged naval blockade of Iranian ports. The move comes as the U.S. defends its costly military operations with a warning that Iran's nuclear strategy mirrors that of North Korea. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump is weighing options to ease the global energy impact of a potential long-term blockade of Iran as tensions in the region remain unresolved. According to a White House official on Wednesday, Trump met with major oil executives the day before to discuss ways to mitigate disruptions as the United States continues efforts to pressure Tehran through a naval blockade targeting its oil exports. The blockade is aimed at forcing Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, a critical global shipping route. Speaking to reporters, Trump praised the operation and signaled it could remain in place for an extended period and urged Iran to move quickly toward a deal.
Well, the blockade is genius, okay? The blockade has been 100% foolproof. It shows how good our Navy is, I can tell you that. Nobody's going to play games. We have the greatest military in the world, and I built much of it during my first term, and we've been building it since, and the greatest anywhere in the world.
Trump has also voiced strong support for the United Arab Emirates' decision to leave OPEC, calling it a positive step toward lowering global energy prices. He said the move could help bring down the cost of oil and gasoline, adding that internal challenges within the cartel may be driving member countries to reconsider their positions. At the same time, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth defended Washington's military actions against Iran during a congressional hearing, where officials estimated the cost of operations has reached $25 billion. Hegseth warned that Iran's nuclear ambitions reflect a pattern seen in North Korea, arguing that Tehran, like Pyongyang, is building a conventional missile shield to support its pursuit of nuclear weapons.
It's the North Korea strategy. You know this very well. The North Korea strategy was use conventional missiles to prevent anybody from challenging them so they could slow walk their way to a weapon.
He described North Korea's program as a key lesson for policymakers, underscoring the urgency of countering similar developments in Iran. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The U.S. government is also reportedly reviewing the possibility of reducing the number of American soldiers stationed in Germany. According to U.S. President Donald Trump on Truth Social on Wednesday, Washington is evaluating a potential troop drawdown, and that a decision will be made in the near future. The remarks come amid growing dissatisfaction in Germany over the conflict with Iran. Earlier this week, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz openly criticized the United States, saying it had entered the war without a clear strategy and was being humiliated by Iran's leadership. Merz also warned that the prolonged blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is delivering a direct energy shock to Europe and proposed a European-led initiative to deploy German minesweepers to help clear naval mines in the critical waterway. And amid concerns that friction over e-commerce giant Coupang's legal case may be stalling security talks between Seoul and Washington, our Oh Soo-young spoke with a former U.S. diplomat who says the alliance itself remains firm but should be managed.
Korea and the United States should focus on building a future nuclear and high-tech partnership, overcoming commercial sticking points in their bilateral relations. That's according to Henry Haggard, a former US State Department official, now a senior advisor at West Exec Advisors. He spoke with Arirang News amid concerns in Seoul that corporate disputes are affecting sensitive security talks, after more than 50 US lawmakers in Washington raised concerns over regulatory treatment of US-linked firms including Coupang. Seoul and Washington's joint bilateral fact sheet last year was expected to pave the way for discussions on advancing cooperation in nuclear power submarines, as well as fuel processing and enrichment under the existing civil nuclear framework. However, talks have been stalled for at least 2 months this year, despite the strategic interest for both sides. As Washington calls on its allies to build their own capabilities and invest in US industries, Korea is ready to be a key partner with a $350 billion investment framework and the industrial base to support US shipbuilding and nuclear supply chains.
So this unlocks a new level of cooperation. It allows and it encourages and works towards less reliance on Russia. I think there's also a significant knock-on effect into the civil nuclear space. Just the fact that we're working more on all things nuclear, I think will also build the natural conversation towards more cooperation on small modular reactors, on traditional reactors, in a space that again represents, over $1 trillion of market over the next 25 years.
National Security Advisor Ri Sung-lak has acknowledged that the Coupang case is affecting the atmosphere of Korea-U.S. consultations and stressed the two issues must remain separate. He said the alliance requires constant management, describing it as a garden that needs ongoing care. Haggard said commercial disputes have risen time and time again, but are simply part of growing pains.
It's not just about the security relationship, it's also this technological relationship and this very advanced relationship. That's where we should be heading. To do that, we have to find a way to manage Korea's regulatory evolution, and the U.S. has to understand how Korea works such that they can match that pace and that evolution and profit from it. Really, I mean, it's a win-win.
Amid concerns, Haggard expressed confidence that the alliance itself is not being undermined and remains on course towards a more strategic partnership. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
A day after the appellate verdict for former First Lady Kim Gun-hee, the court has delivered its second instance ruling in the case against former President Yoon Suk-yeol on charges that included the obstruction of his arrest. Our political correspondent An Sung-jin has more.
7 years. A special appellate panel at the Seoul High Court dedicated to insurrection-related cases sentenced former President Yoon Suk-yeol to 7 years for obstructing his own arrest and related charges on Wednesday afternoon.
The defendant is hereby sentenced to 7 years of imprisonment.
This is more than the first ruling, which was 5 years, but less than what prosecutors had appealed for, which was 10 years. Yoon's defense team stated that they will be appealing. The appellate ruling for Yoon, which began at 3 p.m., was live-streamed, and the verdict was handed down at around 4 p.m. The court cited a range of factors in making the decision: violation of the Presidential Security Act for ordering the deletion of secure phone records, obstruction of martial law declaration documents, abuse of power, and special obstruction of public officials and execution of duties during Yoon's first attempt to block arrest. This marks the first appellate decision tied to allegations surrounding the December 3rd martial law declaration and the inaugural case handled by the court's insurrection-focused division. Former President Yoon Suk-yeol faced multiple charges, including allegedly mobilizing the Presidential Security Service to obstruct the execution of an arrest warrant by the Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials. He's also accused of convening a flawed meeting ahead of declaring the emergency martial law and drafting the martial law proclamation, destroying it, and ordering the deletion of secure phone call records. In the initial trial held in January, the court sentenced him to 5 years in prison, which the prosecutors from the special counsel appealed, arguing it was too lenient, leading to this appeal. Meanwhile, in a separate case on charges of leading an insurrection, Yoon was sentenced to life imprisonment in February, with the appellate trial currently underway. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Chi Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. U.S. President Donald Trump said on Wednesday he discussed a possible ceasefire in Ukraine during a 90-minute phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin also said Putin proposed a temporary halt to mark the World War II victory anniversary on May 9th. Trump told reporters he floated the idea of a ceasefire and added he thinks Putin might go along with it. A similar truce announced by Putin last year lasted 3 days, but was never agreed with Kyiv. Trump also said Putin offered assistance on the issue of Iran's enriched uranium, but he told Putin he first wants him to focus on ending the war in Ukraine. In North London on Wednesday, 2 Jewish men were stabbed on the street. Both men are in hospital in stable condition. A 45-year-old suspect was arrested after police brought him down with a taser. London's police chief said the suspect had a history of serious violence and mental health issues. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer called the attack utterly appalling and pledged increased funding for Jewish community security. North London's Jewish community has also been the target of recent arson attacks. All 4 of America's largest technology companies beat Wall Street expectations in their quarterly earnings reports on Wednesday, but market reaction was mixed, with investors focused less on what these companies earned and more on what they planned to spend. Alphabet rose nearly 7% after hours after its cloud unit reported 63% growth, and its total revenue hit nearly $110 billion. Amazon gained 4% on strong revenue of $181 billion. Microsoft was little changed despite beating forecasts. But Meta was the outlier, falling over 6% after hours after raising its 2026 spending plan to as much as $145 billion. President Trump says his administration will release as much information as possible on UFOs in the near future. He said on Wednesday that a government review has turned up, quote, a number of interesting documents. Trump set the review in motion back in February, directing agencies to open records on unidentified aerial phenomena. Prior Pentagon investigations concluded no proof of extraterrestrial activity on Earth has ever been found.
Monday's rain made things so much greener outside, and the capital area is enjoying clear skies and pleasant spring sunshine today. But from late this afternoon, much of the southern provinces and Jeju-do Island will see 5 to 10 millimeters of rainfall through tonight, while Jeju could receive lingering rain until tomorrow morning. Temperature-wise, a classic spring setup continues with cooler mornings and milder afternoons. Friday's daytime highs could get up to 25 degrees Celsius here in the capital, but by Sunday, will drop down to 19 degrees. And just like yesterday, the capital area in Gangwon-do province will stay mostly sunny all day today, but the rest of the country will be under cloudier skies. Seoul will be getting up to 23 degrees Celsius. Daegu, Gyeongju, Gwangju will be all getting up to 20 degrees. Air quality will be clean nationwide all day today. Well, it seems like many will be taking a long weekend through Children's Day next Tuesday. Nationwide rain is expected next Sunday. Otherwise, it's going to be fairly sunny.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.